Raise your hand whenever you feel like it. Right now, it feels obvious that you are in control. You weighed it, you chose the moment, and you acted. You are the author of that decision. But here is something deeply unsettling. In the laboratory, scientists watching your brain can sometimes see your decision forming before you are aware of having made it. The action is already on its way while you are still under the impression that you are deciding, which raises a question that has haunted philosophy for centuries and now haunts neuroscience too. When you choose, are you truly the author, or are you just the last to find out what your brain has already decided? Few things feel more certain than free will. All day long, you experience yourself making choices. What to eat, what to say, whether to keep watching this or to click away. Each time, it feels like you, some inner author, considering the options and freely picking one. This feeling is the bedrock of how we live. Our entire sense of responsibility rests on it. We praise people for good choices, and we blame them for bad ones, precisely because we assume they could have done otherwise. Take away the ability to have chosen differently, and our whole moral world seems to wobble. So the stakes here could hardly be higher, and the science does not make it comfortable. In the 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet ran an experiment that still unsettles people today. He asked volunteers to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact instant they became consciously aware of the decision. Meanwhile, sensors tracked their brain activity. The results were staggering. A rising wave of brain activity, called the readiness-potential, appeared around half a second before the person moved. But the conscious feeling of deciding came much later, only a fraction of a second before the action. In other words, the brain seemed to start the decision before the person was aware of choosing it at all. The choice was already underway, and only afterward did it feel like you. Now, Libet's study was just the beginning, and people argued about it for decades, so scientists pushed further with modern brain scanners. In some later experiments, researchers could predict which of two buttons a person would press several seconds before the person felt they had decided. Several seconds. By reading patterns of brain activity alone, the outcome could be guessed while the volunteer still felt completely undecided. It is important to be careful here. These were simple artificial choices in a lab, not proof about every decision you make. But the direction is deeply provocative. It suggests that the conscious feeling of deciding may sometimes arrive after the real work is already done, downstream of processes you never see. But the challenge to free will runs much deeper than any single experiment. It comes from the basic picture of how the universe works. Every event, as far as we can tell, is caused by the events before it. One moment leads to the next, according to unbreaking physical law. Now turn that on your own mind. Your brain is made of atoms, obeying those same laws. Your thoughts arise from neurons firing, and those firings are caused by earlier ones, stretching back before your birth. If every state of your brain is the inevitable result of what came just before, then in what sense could you have chosen differently? A decision might feel free and still be the only thing that could possibly have happened. At this point, many people reach for a lifeline: quantum physics. Deep down, the universe is not perfectly deterministic. At the tiniest scales, there is genuine randomness, so maybe that is where freedom hides. But look closer, and this lifeline slips away, because randomness is not the same as freedom. If your choices were ultimately caused by a random quantum flicker in your neurons, that would not make them yours. It would just make them accidents. A decision made by the roll of a cosmic dice is no more free and no more you than one dictated by falling dominoes. Freedom seems to need something more than both, not iron determinism and not blind chance, but genuine authorship, and that turns out to be surprisingly hard to locate. So is that the end of free will? Not quite. Because many philosophers argue we have been defining it wrong all along. This view is called compatibilism. It says, of course you cannot escape the laws of cause and effect, but that was never what mattered. What matters is a different, more practical kind of freedom. Were you acting according to your own desires and reasons, rather than being forced or drugged or held at gunpoint? A person choosing a meal they love is free in every way that actually counts, even if that choice has deep causes. On this view, free will is not about breaking the chain of causation. It is about whose reasons the action flows from, and when it flows from you, that is freedom enough. There is a subtle trap hiding in this whole debate, and it is worth naming. When we hear that the brain decided before you were aware, we picture a little you sitting inside, being overruled by the brain. But there is no little you separate from your brain. You are not a passenger trapped inside a machine that makes decisions without you. You are the machine. You are that whole storm of neural activity, including the parts that run ahead of your awareness. So when your brain begins a decision before the conscious spotlight catches up, it is not someone else deciding for you. It is still you deciding. Just more of you than the narrow sliver you happen to be aware of. And here is where losing the illusion can quietly hand you something better. Because if people are shaped by causes they never chose, their genes, their childhood, their wiring, then the cruelest kinds of judgment begin to soften. The person who wronged you was, in some real sense, the product of everything that made them. This does not erase accountability. We still protect each other and still expect better, but it can dissolve a certain bitter, self-righteous hatred and replace it with something closer to understanding, and you can turn that same compassion inward on your own worst moments. You did what the whole of you at that time was going to do. Now you can become someone who does differently. So, do you actually decide anything? Perhaps not in the way you imagined as a ghostly author floating free of all cause. That kind of magical free will may well be an illusion. But there is another kind that survives every experiment. You are still the place where reasons are weighed, where values collide, where the future is genuinely worked out. The deciding really does happen, and it happens as you. Whether or not you could have done otherwise, you are still the one who must do the choosing now. So let me leave you with this. If your choices flow from everything you are, then the deepest freedom left to you is to slowly, patiently become someone whose choices you are proud of. What will you build yourself into? Tell me in the comments. And if you love questions that quietly reshape how you live, subscribe to First Principles Talk. We're just getting started.